You have likely stood in the garden center looking at those straight wooden stakes or rigid cattle panels and assumed that vertical gardening simply means going up. That is where most of us start. We have a small plot. We want more food from the same soil. So, we build a wall. We plant a straight row of seeds. We put up a straight fence and we tie everything to it. It looks efficient. It looks orderly. For the first few weeks of June, it feels like you have figured it out. The plants climb, the sun hits them, and everything is crisp and green. But then July arrives. The vines get heavy. The leaves at the top start to grow thick and wide, soaking up all that summer sun. And down below, the story changes. It gets dark. You start to see yellow leaves near the soil. You see spotting. You reach in to harvest, and you are fighting through a damp tangle of stems just to find a tomato or a bean that is already tough and overgrown. You built a wall, and walls cast shadows. When we plant in a straight vertical line, we are essentially telling the plant to compete with itself. The top creates a canopy that starves the bottom. We focus so much on the square footage on the ground that we forget about the cubic footage in the air. This is not a failure of your soil. And it is not a lack of effort on your part. It is simply a geometry problem. We are trying to force a three-dimensional living thing into a two-dimensional plane. We treat sunlight like it only comes from directly above, forgetting that the morning and afternoon sun comes in at an angle. By building flat vertical walls, we block that light. We create a humid dark pocket in the center of the row where airflow stops, where disease breeds, and where fruit hides. You can pour water and fertilizer onto that bed, but you cannot fix a lack of light with chemicals. We need to stop building walls and start building catchers. When you look at a garden bed, you are conditioned to see the soil as the limiting factor. You measure your yield by the square foot of dirt. But if you shift your perspective just a little, you realize that the soil is just the anchor. The real engine of your garden is the leaf. Every single leaf is a solar panel, and its job is to turn sunlight into sugar. That sugar is what builds the tomato, the cucumber, or the bean. If a leaf is shaded, it stops being a producer and starts being a consumer. The plant has to spend energy to keep that shaded leaf alive, energy that should be going into growing fruit. This is why the vertical wall fails. It stacks leaves directly on top of one another. The top 10% of the plant does all the work, and the bottom 90% struggles to breathe. To double your yield without digging more beds, you don't need more fertilizer. You need more surface area for the sun to hit. You have to stop thinking about your garden as a floor plan and start thinking about it as a light trap. We need to take that dense vertical wall of foliage and crack it open. Think about how a solar farm is laid out. They don't stack the panels flat on the ground, and they don't stand them straight up like a fence. They angle them. They position them to catch the morning sun, the high noon sun, and the fading afternoon light. We need to do the exact same thing with our vines. We want to guide the plant so that as it grows taller, it also grows wider, but not in a way that chokes the row. We want to create a shape that invites the light into the center of the plant rather than blocking it out. When you open up the canopy, you are doing two things at once. First, you are drastically increasing the number of leaves that have direct access to sunlight. More sun means more energy, and more energy means more fruit. Second, and perhaps just as important for those of us in humid climates, you are creating a chimney. By angling the growth outward, you allow air to move freely through the center of the row. That airflow dries off the morning dew before fungal spores can take hold. You stop fighting blight because you have removed the damp, stagnant conditions where it lives. You are using geometry to solve a biological problem. The solution to the vertical trap is to invert the architecture. In the homesteading world, you often see people using cattle panels or bamboo poles tied together at the top to form a tent or an A-frame. It is a sturdy shape and it holds itself up well, but biologically, it is backward. An A-frame starts wide at the bottom where the plant is just a stem, and it gets narrow at the top where the plant is exploding with growth. It constricts the vine exactly when it needs the most room to breathe. We need to flip that shape upside down. We call this the VWGE system. This is not a specific product you have to buy from a catalog. It is a structural framework that changes how your garden interacts with the sky. Instead of your trellis leaning in, it leans out. You plant your seeds or transplants in the same narrow row you always have, right down the center line of the bed. But as the plants emerge, you guide them onto supports that angle outward away from the center path, creating a V shape that widens as it gets taller. Think about what this does to the plant's environment. In a traditional vertical row, the foliage becomes a dense brick. In the V-wedge, you are spreading the canopy open like a book. The further up the plant grows, the more space it claims. This matches the natural life cycle of the plant. A tomato or bean plant is small in June, so it needs very little space at the bottom of the V. By August, when that plant is massive and heavy, it has reached the widest part of the trellis. The infrastructure expands in lockstep with the biological mass. This system creates a distinct separation of duties. The soil in the narrow center strip is for roots, water, and mulch. It is shaded and cool because the canopy is spreading out above it, which helps retain moisture during the dog days of summer. Meanwhile, the fruit hangs down from the angled trellis, often dangling in free space rather than resting against a stem or sitting in the dirt. You can walk down the row and see exactly what is ripe. You aren't hunting for food, you are simply collecting it. Most importantly, the V-wedge captures the full arc of the sun. Because the leaves are angled upward and outward, the morning sun hits the eastern face, the afternoon sun hits the western face, and the high noon sun penetrates right down into the open center of the V. There is no dark side to the row. Every leaf is pulling its weight. This is how you double the effective growing area without tilling a single extra inch of ground. You aren't planting more. You are simply giving the plant the architecture it needs to reach its full genetic potential. You do not need a welding rig or an engineering degree to build a VWGE. You likely have most of the materials leaning against your shed right now. The beauty of this system is that it relies on tension, not heavy lumber. We are going to build what essentially looks like a split clothesline. Start with your anchors. Drive a heavy metal T-post deep into the ground at both ends of your garden row. These are the spines of the system, so get them steady. Now here is where we deviate from the standard fence. At the very top of each post, about 6 feet off the ground, you are going to bolt on a horizontal crossarm. A simple 3-foot length of treated 2x4 lumber works perfectly. Bolt it tight so it forms a capital T. Now run a line of high-tensile wire or heavy-duty synthetic cord from the left tip of the first crossarm all the way down to the left tip of the far crossarm. Pull it tight. Guitar string tight. Do the same for the right side. When you step back, you should see 2 parallel lines floating in the air, roughly 3 feet apart, hovering over your single strip of soil. This is your skeleton. The actual trellis is made of string. We use simple baling twine or jute. You tie a loop around the base of your tomato or bean seedling using a loose knot that won't strangle the stem as it thickens. Then you pull the string up to the high wire, but you don't go straight up. You alternate. The first plant gets tied to the left wire. The second plant gets tied to the right wire. The third goes left. The fourth goes right. From the side, it looks like a chaotic web. But look from the end of the row. You have created a perfect V shape using nothing but string and tension. You have turned a single overcrowded file of plants into 2 spacious airy walls of green, all rooted in the same square foot of earth. The structure is lightweight. It catches the wind without toppling, and best of all, it disappears when the season is over. You just cut the strings, compost the vines, and your heavy infrastructure, the posts and wires, stays ready for next year. The real magic of the VWGE isn't in the building phase. It is in the daily rhythm of the growing season. When you first set this up in late May or early June, it is going to look almost comically empty. You will have this wide, heavy-duty wire structure hovering over tiny transplants that are barely 6 inches tall. You might feel foolish dedicating that much airspace to such small plants. Trust the geometry. You are building for August, not June. As the weeks roll on, your job changes from construction to guidance. This system relies on a technique called a pruning to a single leader. Because we are giving each plant its own designated string, we need to make sure the plant respects that lane. Once a week, you walk the row with a cup of coffee in your hand. You aren't hoeing weeds or hauling water. You are simply managing the architecture. You identify the main stem of the tomato or cucumber, and you gently wind it around the string. It doesn't even need ties. The rough texture of the vine will grab the twine, and the natural clockwise motion of the sun helps lock it in place. At the same time, you snap off the suckers, those little side shoots that try to grow out of the armpits of the leaves. In a cage or a fence system, you let those grow to create a bush, but here we are growing a vine. By removing the chaotic side growth, you channel all that root energy into one strong highway, creating fruit. It takes about 10 minutes to do a whole row. And because the plants are leaning away from you, everything is visible. You aren't hunting for suckers in a dense thicket. They are right there in front of your face. By mid-July, the shape reveals itself. What was once a single line of green has split into 2 distinct walls. The center of the bed, where the roots live, is now under a permanent cool shadow cast by the spreading V above. The soil stays moist days longer than your neighbor's exposed garden. But look up and the fruit is basking in full unblocked sunlight. The plants have separated themselves, giving you a clear walking path down the middle. You can see the airflow. You can feel the difference in humidity. The system is no longer just a trellis. It is a climate control device for your vegetables. When harvest time arrives in late summer, you will notice something different about your daily routine. In a traditional row, picking is a contact sport. You are wrestling with sticky vines, getting covered in yellow pollen, and squatting down to hunt for fruit hidden near the dirt. With the V-wedge, the dynamic is calm because the vines lean away from the center path. Gravity pulls the fruit down into the open air. The tomatoes and beans hang like ornaments. You walk down the row upright. Your hands stay clean, and you can see every single ripe vegetable at a glance. You pick what is ready, and you leave the rest with no damage to the plant, because you never had to force your way into the canopy. But the name of this section is the double harvest, and that does not just refer to the volume of fruit on the vines. It refers to the empty space you created in the middle. Remember that cool shaded strip of soil directly under the V. In a normal garden, that space is choked by low-hanging leaves and darkness. In this system, it is a protected tunnel with filtered light and excellent airflow. This creates a microclimate that effectively cheats the seasons. In July, when the sun is scorching the rest of your yard and bolting your lettuce, the soil inside the VWGE remains 10 to 15 degrees cooler. This is prime real estate. While your tomatoes are climbing the strings toward the sky, you can plant a secondary crop of heat-sensitive greens, spinach, arugula, or cilantro right down the center line between the tomato roots. The tomato vines act as a living shade cloth. They take the brunt of the harsh midday sun, letting only the dappled, gentle light filter down to the greens below. This is where the system truly pays off. You are not just growing vertically, you are stacking seasons. You are harvesting heat-loving crops from the top of the trellis and cool weather crops from the bottom of the trellis at the exact same time. You are getting a salad and the slicing tomato to go on top of it from the same 4-foot strip of ground. You haven't added more beds. You haven't bought more land. You have simply utilized the shade that used to be a problem and turned it into an asset. This is how a small homestead feeds a family without expanding its footprint. You let the architecture do the work of a shade house, doubling the productivity of that single row. There is a quiet peace that comes from knowing your garden can handle a storm. When the late summer thunderstorms roll in, pushing heavy winds across the plains, the solid wall of a traditional trellis acts like a sail. It catches the full force of the gale, often snapping posts or tearing vines right out of the wet earth. The V-wedge is different. Because it is open and angled, it lets the wind pass through. The structure works with the physics of the storm rather than fighting it. You sleep better at night, knowing that when you walk out the next morning, your work will still be standing. This isn't just about protecting a plant. It is about protecting your time and your reliance on that harvest. This system shifts your mindset from gambling to investing. We aren't chasing a prize-winning pumpkin or a record-breaking harvest that happens once every 5 years. We are building a system that guarantees a good harvest every single year. Predictability is the most valuable crop a homesteader can grow. When you can count on those tomatoes, you can plan your canning schedule. You can budget your grocery bill. You stop reacting to emergencies and start relying on your own backyard. That shift from anxiety to confidence is worth more than any specific vegetable yield. It is the feeling of independence. Do not feel like you need to go out tomorrow and tear up your entire garden to build 10 of these. That is the quickest way to burn out. Start with one bed, just one. Go to the hardware store. Get 4 T-posts and a spool of wire and set up a single 20-foot section. Plant your usual tomatoes or beans, but guide them into this new shape. Watch how they grow. Watch how the light hits the leaves in August. Compare it to the rest of your garden. Let the results convince you, not the internet. Gardening is a long game. It is a conversation between you, the soil, and the sun that lasts a lifetime. The V-wedge is simply a better way to speak that language. It acknowledges that we cannot force nature into a box, but we can guide it into a shape that feeds us better. Take your time, build it strong, and watch how much more your land can give when you stop blocking the light. If this strategy for maximizing your harvest has changed the way you look at your garden beds, please subscribe and like the video. We are digging deep into the methods that turn a simple plot of land into a powerhouse of self-sufficiency. Plant the seeds of your future with us. The next breakthrough in homesteading wisdom will be shared here very soon.